Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to GEEXX Reads. Today I'm going to talk about Elvenbane by Norton and Mercedes Lackey, an image of which you will see here. I have an itch. So, there'll be some mild spoilers, as is usual. Fantasy epic. Norton and Mercedes Lackey were both very well-known authors at the time this was written, which I believe was late 90s, somewhere in the mid to late 90s. This world doesn't necessarily have a name. It is ruled by elves through their own magic power. Humans have been enslaved. There are dragons here, as you would expect from the picture on the cover. Cover art by Boris Vallejo, by the way. But the dragons are hidden in secret. They keep their existence hidden. They are natural shape changers, so they do what they can to blend in, and some of them will occasionally meddle in the affairs of humans and elves for their own amusement. But for the most part, a lot of them just kind of sit in their own lair and ignore the goings on outside of their lair. As I said, elves rule the world, humans are enslaved. Most elves treat their humans a little better than animals. They are killed at a whim, used and abused at a whim, you know, depending on the elf lord themselves. There is a prophecy of a half-breed, half elf, half human, who will rise up and overthrow the elves and their power. It seems that any half-blood inherits both the magical powers of both their human parents and their elven parents, and usually those combined powers make them even more powerful. So breeding amongst, half-bloods are illegal and a death sentence for any human female who was caught carrying a half-blood child. So, and the elves strictly control this. Most half-bloods are born strictly, purely by accident, because the humans are kept under control through collars and magic, and they know the law. They know the law as well as anyone else. They don't want to be, if they're caught with a half-breed child, they will be put to death as well as the child. So, it is something that is very studiously avoided by both parties. But accidents do happen. The first few chapters, we basically find there is a concubine of an elven lord who has found herself pregnant, and she flees into the desert and eventually, dies of exposure during childbirth. She is discovered by a dragon who saves the child and adopts it and raises it as her own. Thus we have a half-blood, the Elvenbane. The dragon who found the child is a dragon shaman who is pregnant at the time herself, which is one of the reasons that she decides to help this child in spite of the fact of the dragon's laws or rules against secrecy. So, can't just abandon a helpless child. She names the child Lashana, or Shana for short. This dragon's name is Alara. She already has a young son named Kemen. These three are the main characters of the story. There are others, but the first few chapters are basically all world building. We learn a little, Alara is on a pilgrimage, something she's supposed to do when she's pregnant, like to meditate in certain locations. It's a tradition, dragon tradition. So we learn about the dragons through her point of view. We see the concubine's point of view as well, learning about lives of humans among the elves and backstory of the world. But that's all we see of her, because she dies in childbirth. The story then jumps forward a few years to Shana as a youngster, a child living among the dragons, and then jumps forward again in several years until as a teenager. That's pretty much the first act one. Um, the subsequent story involves, her leaving the dragon lair to go out living amongst humans and elves, and what happens to her after that. Um, so, I'm not gonna spoil any of that stuff. It's not really important that I do that. Just trying to set up how the story is and what's going on. I'm always worried about reading my books that are over 30 years old or so, over 25 to 30 years old, because I've gone back to read them and discovered they're not as well written as I had remembered. But fortunately, in my opinion, this book is as good as I remember. I think the characters of, honestly, I think the characters of Alara, the dragon mother, and Kemen, her son, the dragon son, are probably the most complex characters in the book, the most well-written and well-rounded characters. Shauna, despite being one of the primary characters, she's not, I like her character, but she's very young, inexperienced, and naive, so she doesn't have a lot of depth. She was raised by dragons with no contact with humans, with almost no knowledge about humans or elves, for that matter, no knowledge of any human, so her story arc is her learning that things outside the dragon lair are not what she assumes them to be, or would think that they are. She has no concept of slavery, or she's a very nice young girl. She has no concept of deliberate cruelty. So, she develops very rapidly in a short period of time. But even still, she's not a very emotionally complex person because of her naivete. Doesn't make her an unpleasant character, but comparing the characters around, I think the dragon characters are better written and more complex. That said, I do wind up liking a lot of the characters in this book. At least the characters, except the characters you're supposed to hate and despise. And even some of them, they're entertaining at least to read. There's a couple of elven lords that we see their points of view. Dryan is one of the main elven lords we see from his point of view. Another one, Triana, we see later in the book. They're, as elves, they, treat their humans as disposable objects with varying degrees of cruelty. It depends on the individual elf. Some of them treat their slaves better than others, but they still consider them slaves and objects to be used and disposed of at their whim. Even the best of them, for the most part. We really don't see much of the humans, their slaves. We see some of them, but their worldview has been, tempered by their slavery and the fact that it's not uncommon for elven lords to put a magical compulsion on them. They have slave collars to control them and to suppress whatever human magic they might have. And, they use magical compulsion to make them just accept that this is the way things are. Humans don't really rebel because they have no concept of it. They've just been, conditioned to believe that they deserve to be slaves, that the elves deserve to be overlords. And just they don't hope for anything more than slightly better conditions for themselves as slaves. A bit of comfort, a bit of, maybe free time, and nothing more than that. They have virtually no ambition amongst themselves. Because we don't see too much of the human and elfin world, we don't get too much of the intricacies or of their interactions. We see some, but we don't. We spend a lot of time with Shauna by herself, so we do kind of occasionally see things from her point of view. I did really enjoy rereading this book, but it's not overly complex. It does not contain overly complex characters. In spite of its length, over 500 pages, it's not, you know, it's just a fairly light read, which you wouldn't expect for a book this thick. But I did enjoy it. I still enjoy it. Just don't expect, you know, to be, considering that the authors themselves are, you know, at the time were like at the top of their game, considered to be at the top of their game, very well known, very popular authors. I wouldn't consider this their best work. That, like, but it doesn't make it less fun to read. It's just, hate to say lighthearted romp, because there is a lot of slavery and brutality amongst, you know, directed at the slaves. So not a lighthearted romp, but it is, you know, it's light fare with some darker elements. There are a few points I would criticize. There's a couple, at least one convenient actions, like, oh, you know, like just a really, really super convenient plot point. And a couple of things that I think are resolved too quickly, which is what makes this a light book, you know, light reading. There's, you know, the story isn't overly complex. But I do recommend it if you like some standard epic fantasy fare. So, Elvenbane by Andre Norton and Mercedes Lackey. Good read. As always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.